Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to inspire and motivate people to never give up on themselves or their dreams. We will chat with highly successful people from all walks of life and discuss what motivates and drives them to successfully attack life head on and never give up. Welcome to episode number 65 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is curiosity. Our quote of the day comes to us from Albert Einstein. I have no special talents. I'm only passionately curious. I'm excited to bring you today's podcast. This is our first episode that we will be doing from halfway around the world, as our guest today comes to us from Australia. In addition to having an awesome accent, in today's episode, our guest shares some powerful words with us. It is my pleasure to introduce Jeff Bullas. Jeff, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Great to be here, and thanks for the invitation, and look forward to our little chat.
I appreciate you coming here all the way from Australia to Connecticut, so thank you for adjusting your schedule for that.
No problem at all, and luckily we have Skype to do this with, so otherwise it would have been a long journey. So something like about 20 hours would be the flying time. So we're on the other side of the planet, and actually we live in the future, by the way, just so letting you Americans know that are listening in. We're actually ahead of you guys, all right? So don't get too cocky.
How many hours are ahead of you?
What time is it there? I think we're about 17 hours ahead. What time is it there? Is it 5 p.m. or something?
6 p.m.
6 p.m. So we're 14 hours ahead of you guys.
All right,
we're 8 a.m. in Sydney, Australia on Wednesday, whereas in Connecticut it would be Tuesday.
That is awesome. So this is the first future podcast we've done. So I appreciate that little intro. So first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to make it happen today, Jeff?
I am always ready to make it happen. It just depends on what's going to happen. That's the key question.
That is very true, and you can't control what happens, but you can control your mindset and how you approach it. So the first question we ask everybody, as the number one objective of our podcast is to motivate and inspire our listeners, I wanted to ask if you had either a personal story about perseverance or perhaps a challenging time that tested you, but you kept on going and didn't quit.
Yeah, that was, we've had a few of those, but I'll go back to maybe the most recent. It was in 2008. I was going through a divorce. I had to sell the family home. I was deeply in debt. I had to close a business. Like if you're talking about stress levels and all the things that you don't want to happen, it was happening. So we had to essentially find a new job, new career, had to find a new home, and we had to redefine, what I was doing. So I'm an avid reader and lover of books, so I find one of the best ways to inspire me in dark times is actually to both hang out with great people and successful people. And I say to my kids, if you want to fly like an eagle, don't hang out with the turkeys. So the reality is that I fed myself some really good books. Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week. I also read a book by David Meerman Scott, The New Rules of Marketing PR, which sort of opened my eyes to the idea of publishing online to attract an audience and generate leads and sales in a business. Tim Ferriss's book, 4-Hour Work Week, was about the transformation that's happening in the digital world and creating a business out of that. And the last bit of inspiration was actually online blog post by HubSpot. It said, if you have an inkling of what you want to write about or start a business on, just start a blog. So, and then I sort of discovered social media back then, and I saw people's activity on Facebook and Twitter, and people were just obsessive about it. And so obviously it was resonating globally, these social networks. We'd seen that happening with MySpace. But so while unemployed, I actually had time on my hands. I actually started the blog. So for me, that was maybe and then we started to publish, and nothing much happened, but I kept going. So as I persisted and as I created content and built my audience, things slowly started to happen. So for me, it's been one of the most defining self-development journeys in my life, the transitioning and transforming my life from one of, I suppose, quiet desperation into one where we transformed it into one where I travel the world speaking now, and just persisted by continuing to publish and attract an audience and grow it. So that was maybe one of the biggest lessons in life I've ever learned. And playing the long game. We're not playing here to get rich quick. So that's maybe one of the most, it's been the most transforming periods of my life the last 8 to 9 years.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and definitely you were tested, and you came out the end not only a better person, but you've taken on this whole social media and blogging component, and now, as you mentioned, you get to travel the world speaking about it. And you talked about a defining self-development journey. One of the things we mention quite often is the self-improvement movement, and one of the things we're always looking to do is add value to other people. So I appreciate you sharing that piece about Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek, which is a great book. I wanted to ask you if you might have read anything recently that you'd like to share with our listeners.
A great book I read recently was Deep Work by a guy called Davenport. Now, I was coming back from a mastermind, and the book Deep Work is a really good book in terms of if you really want to create a life of consequence. So in the book Deep Work, as I was reading it flying back from Phoenix, Arizona I was flying back to Sydney, and as I read it, I actually described a habit that I already had in place and had been doing. And in this book, Vin Davenport actually talks about time blocking and creating place to actually write down and create work that is of consequence, not just sharing cat videos or sharing on Instagram. It's actually sitting down, blocking out time to actually create and then share that with the world. So I realized that I'd been doing that and just given a name to it. Because you can have shallow work. Shallow work is just, product. It's things like respond to emails, okay? Necessary things, but they actually don't usually make a difference or help you build a legacy. So for 4 years, the previous 4 years, I'd got up at 4:30 a.m. before I started my day job, because I eventually got a job. And what happened was from 4:30 a.m. to 9 a.m., I actually created a blog post, researched, and then hit publish and then shared it with the world to my social media channels and to email. So he actually described a habit of actually time blocking, whether it's late at night, setting aside, or it's early in the morning. Everyone's got different habits and they've got family commitments, or just going on a sabbatical, taking a week off, a month off, or a weekend. So Jung in Switzerland actually used to do that, go to his holiday home and actually write his book. So it's a habit I think is really, really important, because as you build content and then publish it and share it, you're actually building a legacy, actually creating content of consequence. So this is one of the most, it just basically described something I'd already been doing and given it a name. And I'd encourage anyone to actually, in this digital world, to actually share their creation with the world, because the world will change you and you will change the world at the same time as you have that conversation online.
No, and I couldn't agree more, and I think there's so much opportunity with all the technology out there today, different ways to connect with people, and look at us right now. We are speaking in the future back to the present, and all done via Skype from halfway across the world. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I wanted to ask you, if you had to define yourself in one word, what would that word be?
Curious.
I like that. You are the first person that has used that word. One of the things we utilize every day in our show is a quote, and I was curious if you have a favorite quote.
Oh, I've got many favorite quotes. In terms of the one I use, which I use my kids, is if you want to fly like an eagle, don't hang out with the turkeys. I think if you really want to get ahead in life, you need to make sure that you surround yourself with the right people. And that is really, really important. And that applies not just to people, it also applies to what you're feeding your mind. So hanging out with people, you can be hanging out with the right books, right? So that's really important to understand.
I could not agree more with that. And I think there are so many opportunities in today's day and age to connect with people, whether that's via a mastermind group or whether that's a mentor. And one of the things you just mentioned is hanging out with the right people. And that doesn't always physically mean, nor do you always physically have the opportunity to connect with people in person, but you do have the opportunity to read things, to watch things, to download things. So I'm glad you touched on that, because that's something that we often touch on with many of our guests, is the ability in today's day and age to connect with people in so many different ways, where you, for example, could mentor somebody without even knowing it, because they're following your blogs or they're checking out your website or your social media channels. So I'm glad you really touched on that, because it is important to realize that it's all about going ahead and taking action in today's day and age.
Absolutely.
As we all know, Jeff, life is incredibly challenging, and there are so many obstacles and things that come our way that sometimes we have control over, and a lot of times we don't. So I was curious, what motivates and inspires you each and every day to keep going?
Curiosity. So for me, basically, life is an adventure, and a journey. Okay, a lot of people think of it as a destination. Okay, I've arrived, now I can retire. I think that is a very dangerous place to be. The R word I don't have in my vocabulary. The reality is that if you are curious, that will keep you inspired and it will keep you motivated. If you just sort of settle, don't keep learning, then you're not going to be inspired, not going to get new ideas. And the next part of it is actually execution. So for me, it's really important that I keep feeding that curiosity, keep researching, keep reading, and then inspiration comes from that. Because inspiration doesn't come from a vacuum. Sitting on top of a mountain meditating is good, okay, and I start the day with meditation quite often. But the reality is you've got to feed your mind, because creativity and ideas doesn't come out of a vacuum. It comes out of surrounding yourself with great ideas, inspiration from books, people, videos, and the list goes on, but great content.
No, that is so true. Great content is very, very important. And it's the consistency of the great content as well.
Absolutely.
If you could go back to the 20-year-old version of yourself and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
I think to make sure that you're actually trying to find your passionate purpose in life. I think passion is everything. It's where it starts. It's the only thing it's the thing that'll keep you going. And essentially looking back on it, discovering a passionate purpose was something I was doing, because I was a teacher for 6 years and I realized I didn't enjoy this. I hated it. I was teaching people that didn't want to learn. They're called teenagers. So I actually left my teaching career when I was about 27, because I was looking for my passionate purpose. And that, I think, is the difference between living a life of difference versus just existing. So that, I think, is what I'd tell my younger self. In fact, but it was burning deep within me, this curiosity of what am I here on this planet for? So I think make sure you try and find that passionate purpose. Some people are given to them, when they're 4 or 5. I'm going to be a violinist. I'm going to be a painter. And some will just know, okay? But the majority of us don't know. So that's your purpose, to find your passionate purpose.
No, and I like that. And find it as early as you can. And that doesn't mean that if you don't have it at the age of 20 or 25 or 30 that you failed. It just means that you've tried different things along the way. So I will hope our listeners will touch on that as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. I actually, during my summer holidays, just before I left teaching, I went out and tried 3 different types of careers in just 2 or 3 weeks. It's like my career experience mission, I suppose. So I realized that the technology area, which is changing, always evolving, was the area that I wanted to get into. So you really got to give yourself a lot of life experiences and find out what really resonates with you, what touches your soul, and then grab that and run with it, and then that will evolve as well. So passionate purpose is not a static, destination. It's actually, again, a journey. So, and where you start with that passionate purpose will evolve into something else over time, and will continue to evolve.
No, that is really interesting that you touch on that, because it does evolve, and I think whatever your passion is, it's going to change over time, not meaning changing from one industry or career, but it's always going to change. And I think what you've touched on, I believe 3 times now, is that life is a journey, and the best thing to do is to live it to the best of your ability and try as many different things as you can to make sure that you do find that passionate thing that you really want to do each and every day.
Absolutely.
So here's a little different question for you. If you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Elon Musk fascinates me because he's in so many areas and so driven and so persistent and hardworking and also creative. So that is a guy I'd be great to have dinner with.
He's actually the 3rd most answered individual for that question. So I think his curiosity and the way he does things and how he goes about, but you also touched on it, his work ethic, I think is very interesting. And I think that would be quite a dinner, you and Elon Musk. I would like to be either the waiter or the server, just to kind of get some of that knowledge that he imparts on you.
Exactly.
So I wanted to ask you, Jeff, is there anything exciting that you're working on now or possibly something that you're launching that you'd like to share with our listeners?
We're working on a book at the moment, so that's what I'm really excited about. So it hasn't been launched yet. We're still at the editing and refining stage. So, but it's based upon my what I've learned over the last 7 or 8 years. So that's the project I'm working on at the moment.
No, I like that. And before we let you go, I wanted to ask if you possibly have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners.
Don't settle. Continue to be curious. And basically, for me, I think we all are, as humans, creative. So I would encourage anyone not just to create, but also to publish and share your gift and ideas and inspiration with the world. And that's what the social mobile web gives us today. It's democratized publishing, it's democratized marketing. It allows us to get our message out to the world at scale. I would encourage anyone to actually start creating and then share that gift with the world and use digital media to help you do that. Because what is really fascinating about the social web is that you can do that, and what happens is you start a conversation with a tribe that you maybe don't even know that you belong to. For me, it was people that love social media marketing, digital marketing. So what happened is that when you start that conversation, you will change the world and the world will change you. And it's just an incredible, I suppose, vortex of opportunity that comes out of that if you're willing to persist and keep doing that. So create, publish, and then you really will exist and thrive. And that's one of my mantras that I share when I do keynotes. Basically, I create, I publish, I exist, because that's what the social web's given us. It's given us all a platform to share our gifts with the world.
I like that. Create, publish, exist, and thrive. And before we let you go, Jeff, I wanted to ask, what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you or follow you?
You can go to jeffbullas.com and you can basically subscribe to my emails. They'll give you a great 55-page book, 101 plus tips to grow your traffic without paying Facebook or Google a cent. You can find me on Twitter at Jeff Bullas, all one word. There's a stream of consciousness that comes out of there every 15 minutes, and you will see some great content. So Google me. You'll find me everywhere. So not hard to find. I'm online in all sorts of nooks and crannies.
I appreciate that. We will add that in the show notes. And listen, Jeff, I cannot thank you enough for not only being on our podcast, but sharing what you shared with us from halfway around the world. You are the first individual from Australia, so I appreciate you spending your time with us. And this is the first futuristic podcast we have done.
I'm glad to be in the future, making sure that you guys know what's about to happen.
Thanks, Jeff. To sum up today's episode and our theme of the day, curiosity, Jeff definitely delivered. When dealt a tough personal hand, Jeff decided to take action, and he mentioned how during these tough times it was so important for him to not only read great books, but also to surround himself with great people. One of the things Jeff mentioned 2 different times was the importance of time blocking and how it had positively helped him focus and accomplish his goals. He mentioned how life was a journey and why it is so important to both be creative and to share our message with the world. In his closing remarks, Jeff spoke about how, by being creative, you will not only change the world, but the world will change you. So our question to you today is very simple. Are you being creative? And if so, how are you sharing your message? In today's day and age, with the numerous social media outlets, it has never been easier to not only create, but also to connect with others. Our call to action is just that. Go create and connect. Don't think, hesitate, or question, just do. Whether it's a story, a picture, a video, or a blog, go do something creative today out of your comfort zone and go for your greatness. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.